I feel that as an audience member, our moral values are constantly challenged throughout the whole play, constantly tossing and turning between who we agree with, who we don't. And I was wondering if that was an intention you had when writing it.
Totally, yeah. And to put myself through that as well. So I think I just, at any given moment, whoever was speaking, tried to totally inhabit them and to believe in what they were saying. And then the next time the next person spoke, to totally inhabit them. So yeah, to me that just feels very exciting dramatically. It's genuinely sort of dialectical, that pull backwards and forwards. I thought, apart from anything else, just as theatre, just that pull, it's very alive, I think.
I think as well that when we were working on it with the text, which is so amazing, I actually have to introduce, because these brilliant young people didn't introduce themselves, Rachel and Thomas, who are part of our Young Agitators team, and they come into rehearsals and they work on the play, and then they pose these agitational questions to us about this. So these are the future of theatre that you're looking at here, so remember their faces and names. But I just want to say, when we were working on the play, for me, in terms of Thomas's question and Mark's response, it was very interesting to calibrate, and we're kind of constantly doing that, and we still have those conversations with the company, because I think we're very lucky, we've got an extraordinary cast, and they're all actually incredibly likeable and very charismatic on stage, and there's something that we had to really calibrate in terms of their sort of likeability and then their dislikability, so that we didn't kind of fall for them too much, and that when those twists happened, we would really go, oh, we'd fallen for you that bit, but then there's that kind of twist. So it was quite a kind of complex journey, I think, that kind of working out what that would be to get those turns that Mark wanted.
And having experienced playing kind of different stages, I've kind of felt myself agreeing with different people at different times and having a completely different response each time, which I feel like one of its strong points. And I was also interested because I'm somebody who's had a turbulent relationship with the academy system, and I was wondering, was that something that appealed to you and something that you wanted to particularly write about?
I think, the play literally started because I remembered in a sort of half awake, half asleep state, waking up one morning, God, people were caned when I was at school. I went to the local just state comprehensive school, Haywards Heath, and Warden Park Comprehensive, and I just thought, well, people, it was boys. It was a mixed-sex school, but the girls were thought to be too weak and feminine to be beaten. So I thought, God, that's just weird. I've almost forgotten it. And then I Googled, and it said 1986 it was made illegal. So I thought, oh, you'd actually be near retirement, but you could be a teacher who'd caned. And so the plot unravelled. And so, I thought, well, I was at school a long time ago, so I need to talk to some teachers. And I did the very useful thing now for research, put a message on Facebook saying, can anybody help me? I need to talk to some teachers. And it's when I started talking to teachers that so many people wanted to talk about the academy system and the transition to academies and what was going on in academies. So really that was stuff that I learnt afresh from talking to people for the play, and realised, a play about education now, that the academy system had was just very present in schools now, and that had to be incorporated into the story.
Along with that, you also really conveyed the tension within the family unit. Was it always your intention to discuss the legacy of corporal punishment in such an intimate and personal way?
I think as I worked on the play, I pared it back more and more and more until it became the three characters in a room. So there were many drafts of the play, and it was initially a multi-location play with many characters. And I just sort of, with each draft did a sort of balloon debate, and as in who's going to jump up, until I ended up just with the three of them in the family. So it became a family play in that way. Yeah, and I guess if Edward has been in that position at school, within those power structures that are given to him as a teacher and as a man, I was thinking, how has that bled through into how he thinks of himself as a husband and father, and how he behaves as a husband and father. And I mean, in some ways, I think when I watch it, the cruelty of his domestic bullying is more shocking than the history of the caning. Maybe that's just because the characters are present on stage in front of us, but actually just the verbal abuse of the wife and the daughter and the controlling behaviour in this moment, in this play, in this room, is, I find, more disturbing really than the cane. But I think the two are linked. The fact that that man is given and expected to have that sort of patriarchal role in the school has then poisoned the way he conducts himself as a husband and a father. That's slightly me having written the play and now understanding it more. I didn't, I discover things as I write a play, so I couldn't have told you that before I wrote the play. But now, having written it and rehearsed it and seen it for 10 shows, I can sort of say I think that's probably what's going on there.
Yeah, I think as well the thing for me about the kind of family relationships are that's the thing that makes the sort of morality of the play so complex, because you could take the sort of arguments that the characters have to do with the caning, to do with corporal punishment, bullying, and the academy school status, but put them into the situation where they're incredibly flawed, and that they can kind of ignite deep-seated passions within the family really immediately. I think really adds to the complexity of that situation. So I think it's brilliant that you did the balloon debate and lost all the characters and just put it into that kind of tight pressure cooker. Because, you really recognise, I really recognise my sort of suburban upbringing in that family.
You also discussed how the youth responses turned violent. Do you think that for new generations it's possible to affect change and discuss change without extreme anger and violence?
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously there is a lot of anger on, not even literally, but on Twitter and all of that. There is that mood often of just anger and resentment, but actually I think but I think there's a lot more articulate, a lot more questioning and challenging that's very well articulated by young people. So I don't feel that the snowflake thing that Maureen calls them, which oddly a snowflake is supposed to be terribly weak, but then also they're supposed to be outside the house stoning people, which doesn't seem quite, snowflake doesn't quite seem the word. But no, I'm actually really excited by people of your generation that actually they're questioning things and they're asking big questions and asking them very persistently and rightly. I think more so than we did at that stage. I think we were a bit more bumbly and had flashes of anger about things, but then didn't. And but I think there's a more persistent and more thorough questioning and investigation that's happening with people coming out of university now. So I'm very excited by that generation.
Yeah. And would you say that you think the generation gap and kind of differing opinions amongst generations has an effect on the way progress happens and how radical it is? Because I felt like in this play, the ages of the characters was kind of exposed through their opinions, and the kind of world that they'd grown up in and the morals that world held was very, very well articulated.
Well, you're probably in touch with lots of different generations. A, because you're reading plays from people of all different ages, but also as a mum and stuff. Yeah. So you're probably more better placed to answer that question.
I mean, I think that generationally, I may be being sort of sentimental about this, but I feel especially in my job and the world that we're able to have in our sort of lovely echo chamber of the Royal Court, I feel that the listening and the conversations that go on intergenerationally are more than they've ever been before. And I think that's really, really interesting. We really do care, and you know, it's sort of sent up slightly in the play, you know, and Nicola's character Anna talks about pupil voice, but it really matters to us about working with an empowered younger generation who can challenge us and can see that they can affect change upon us in this environment. And I think that my children feel the same way, and they feel that about in their school environment. So I think within intimate relationships, I think that feels a very positive thing. I think, however, on the kind of more civic place in society, I think we all do feel quite paralysed intergenerationally and in terms of things that we can kind of impact change on within our own world, and I think that's a massive challenge. So we want it more, but I think we feel we can achieve it less. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no. I think that's great.
Bearing that in mind, do you think that movements such as, you know, the Me Too movement recently and exposing mistakes from the past is the way to break potentially the cyclical nature of social history as it's looking right now?
Wow, I think that something like Me Too and the kind of abuses of power about that, you know, we are a status-driven, humans are status-driven. You know, we create tribes, we create hierarchies all the time. You know, there is a kind of biological aspect to kind of male power over female power. And so I think that, you know, a year's worth of fingers being pointed and people saying things that they haven't said before is not going to even scratch the surface in terms of significant change. But I think that the thing that's important is that we find vocabularies and we start to have different conversations that mean that every time we slip into kind of behaviours and patterns that are so embedded in being human, that we are able to challenge those. So yeah, I don't know whether we will ever see fundamental change in terms of abuses of power, because I think it's so deep-rooted within us. I don't know what you feel about that, Mark.
God, I don't know, it's such a massive thing, isn't it? But yeah, well, that might well be true. It's just very hard to take on board, isn't it? Because it's such a nihilistic, despairing thing to say that we can't change those things. But then I guess the play isn't terribly optimistic. I mean, it's funny, when you write plays, I'm probably more optimistic on a day-to-day thing as a person than when you write a play. You go, oh God, that's as nihilistic as anything you were saying there. Yeah.
But you don't need to live your life nihilistically.
No.
That's the point. I think, you know, you're not sort of going to go, there's no point then in trying to make change happen. But I just think we can't be naive and think just because 2 actresses found the ability to speak out in October last year that we are going to go through major societal change.
Like that.
You know, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and given how quickly we seem to be able to judge the actions of the past, do you think we're doing enough to avoid judgment from future generations?
I'm going to throw that back at you.
Yeah, you are the future generations.
What do you think?
Oof, that. I hope we're not, but we probably are. I think it's probably quite a natural human thing to do, to kind of always think that your way of doing things is right. It's not necessarily that what we're doing is wrong, but we might be neglecting a certain group of people that will be very empowered in the future and will be seen as like, what were you doing? Why did you ignore them? I think it's inevitable that we'll just constantly keep changing.
No, I do think that there's a massive sense of sort of anger in younger generations, which hopefully will, you know, form some kind of action that will encourage change, but I'm not sure that just yet we're doing anything that's made enough progress. but
I
we'll
think
see.
the thing that's really interesting about that is about, you know, Zadie Smith has a brilliant quote about progress is never permanent, so that you have to kind of keep at it. And I think there is a cyclical nature of, do we ever reach a tipping point, and do we all have to kind of keep renewing the questions that we have and the way that we go about it? I think that's the really important thing. And I think the kind of nihilistic thing versus the kind of change thing is about, actually we have to constantly have all the conversations.
Yeah.
And we all have to take responsibility for those, and not just think because one thing happened that that's it then. We will slip back into the quagmire.
Exactly. Right, we have some time for some audience questions, so if you have a question, please do raise your hand. We do kindly ask, though, that you phrase it as a question and not a statement, and just make sure you speak up so we can hear you, please. Who's got a question?
Yes, in the second row.
I'm probably a direct contemporary and similarly went to a large comprehensive where caning was a daily routine. It was always boys that got caned, whether the crimes were worse or not, I don't know. But there seems to be a kind of almost a call for a sort of a war crimes tribunal type situation at the end, where people doing the caning are somehow brought to account historically. But in those schools, the complicity of all the teachers, including those probably against corporal punishment, but who would use the threat of, you'll be down at the headmaster's office if you don't behave, which meant caning, used it themselves as a metaphoric stick to literally have a literal stick.
Yeah.
So the whole teaching organisation was complicit in the whole thing. But when it was made illegal, that was it. That was the end of it. So I wonder if you actually seriously think there is any kind of retribution still needed, or whether we should just put the whole thing that historically to rest.
Yeah.
Just say it's the way it was.
Yeah. I genuinely don't have any answers. I mean, I think the way that he speaks in that last speech is quite provocative, or is he genuinely calling for that to happen? I mean, my sense is that he's slightly saying, dare you do something like actually put us all on trial, or try. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I just started with that thing of the cane, and then how much, as you say, the whole system was complicit in it. It wasn't just caning; it's a whole way of thinking about discipline and structure, and yeah. How do you revisit that? I mean, you know, as I say, I didn't write the play with the answers. I just wrote it with the same questions that you're articulating there, really. So yeah, and even that last speech, really, you know, I think is a question. Is it really something you would do about the cane, is to now find all the men who caned and challenge them about it? Yeah, I think it's a question rather than a press release, you know.
Yes.
I came through the Scottish system where it wasn't cane, it was the tawse, and each teacher had the responsibility of using it or not using it himself. It wasn't a centralised thing.
Yeah.
What caught my ear in the play was the description of the alternative provided by the academy, which seemed to be a psychological imprisonment of the children, completely stifling any kind of development. And having gone through the Scottish system and survived, and got strapped a couple of times, probably more, I'm not sure which is better. I think the impressed psychological thing, was that a deliberate attempt to highlight something that you don't like in the academy system?
Well, they were real things. You know, I didn't know anything about the academy system, and then interviewing teachers, they said, you know, that this eyes forward policy was something that some of the academy schools had introduced. And actually, when we had the press night, there was a story that morning in The Guardian about a pupil taking legal action against an academy school that had very strict, your punishment was sort of an isolation room, and this pupil, for something quite bad, but not, awful, I'd been given something like 3 weeks isolation. So you're in a room on your own, you had 3 5-minute toilet breaks a day.
Sounds like writing, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it's all right.
That's how I get plays out of writing.
So, it's true. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, were you actually at an academy school?
Yeah.
And were you at an academy school?
No.
No. So I just heard about, it was all new information to me, but actually, yeah, the way in which arguably a form of physical punishment has been replaced with a form of sort of psychological punishment seemed to be going on. But was that your experience?
Definitely. I always say that I passed my exams because of it, but I kind of lost, maybe it's too strong to say that I lost my mind as a result of it. But it's because it's very propaganda focused, very psychological, as you said, and it is not kind on a person, I don't think, the way academy schools treat students. But it gets results, and then there's your dilemma. But, yeah.
What kind of results? Passing exams is not the goal of educating children.
Exactly.
Of course not, but it is the goal of academy schools in terms
Yeah.
of business,
Yeah.
so they are successful. Yeah. Our assistant director, Hannah, had also been at an academy school, and her school changed from a normal state comprehensive to an academy school while she was there. And it was really interesting the way that they would literally kind of running around being kind of noisy, and how they would have to go to this silent thing. And it was only after a few months that they sort of realised, as a kind of student body, what had befallen on them. But they all were doing better in the class, so they sort of gave into it rather than rebelling. And she thinks in retrospect, they were sort of brainwashed into going, you are now doing better at your exams, so you will kind of be all right. Which is really interesting.
Yeah, I was totally made to believe that if I failed my exams, I would become nothing. Yeah. But there you go. Right.
But the balance in the play is interesting, isn't it? Where it tips from us going, he's the caner, he's the thing, and then she stands there and she takes the centre stage, and she sort of comes out with this stuff which is so powerful, and you do literally go, I don't know which is worse now.
Yeah.
Neither are good, but I don't know which is
It was a
worse.
key moment in the play. It was
Yeah.
The arc, you were really sucked into the capital punishment, and then suddenly you got hit in the face with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You started to think, whoa, wait a
Yeah.
minute.
Clever, isn't he?
Yeah.
Even though he's only allowed 3 toilet breaks.
Yeah.
Yes?
I was wondering if you were to write a sequel of this play, would you call it The Lynching? Because I think that when you were talking about your articulacy of the subject earlier, one of the great problems we have is that one can identify an issue, and then the very extreme that one is criticising, one takes into one's behaviour in responding to it. Because I would have loved to have seen, but I'd love to have seen what happened when she went through the door.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Because then would people feel better because something they disapproved of had been dealt with as summary justice, which seems to be a lot of the vocabulary now,
Yeah.
of the way people approach nuanced issues.
Yeah. No, we did think about it, having the final stage direction, 200 young people run on stage. No, it's a possibility. But, and I'm sure there will be a production in Heidelberg or something where 200 people do rush on with an axe. But I decided actually in the end that it was sort of more powerful to just leave it with that. We sort of know that's going to happen. I think it is going to happen, isn't it? You sort of feel that it. So I sort of thought, no, we've already completed that because we now believe it's going to happen. That seems inevitable. And I'll save the Royal Court from having to fill up the whole of the side of the building with 200 kids waiting to come on while you will watch the play.
It's also interesting, I think, the structure at the end where the 3 characters each have a kind of final moment, and the moment is also about the family separating, isn't it? It's about, it's about her vengeance, regardless of whether that thing that she says will actually happen. Her act is against her father. He's lost in this, having to acknowledge what it is that he's been part of, and it's no longer wrapped in the blanket and hidden in the attic. And the mother disappears into the attic looking for the plaster, as she's always done, to stick over the problem. Yeah, so for me it's those three separations.
Yes, over there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the generation of men who were caned. I wasn't personally caned, but I feel my friends who I'm still in contact with who were caned still hold it as a badge of honour. Doesn't upset them in any way, shape or form. And it was the thing that was interesting to me was, you talked about polarisation, was the fact that in the play the younger generation are upset on behalf of the older generation. And that, I mean, there was a generational issue on the stage, absolutely, which was very well done. But there was also the generational issue of people who we didn't see.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to comment, because I feel that there's, that was the exaggeration for me, that I don't think it is an issue. I mean, parents smacking their children, you see it happening all the time, shocking. I don't think it's outlawed yet in this country, it is in some countries. So it was going on, and at that time this was a sort of a regularised play. I don't think it's right, but I don't see there's a great outcry, but you're sort of suggesting one with people who are a younger generation and off stage. I just wondered your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was, when I started to think about it, I thought it was possible. Obviously it hasn't happened, but I thought actually, I can imagine a situation in which a school community became that agitated about the discovery of a history of caning. So I think it's that type of storytelling, playwriting, where you look at something that, with that aspect of it, that's possible. It's not an everyday occurrence by any means. In fact, it hasn't occurred at all. But within a given set of circumstances, I can imagine that is possible. And I quite often like writing within that circle. You can write within the circle of very likely, typical. You can write within the circle of totally improbable or impossible, and that takes you into sort of fantasy thing. But I quite like that circle, which is possible. Maybe hasn't even happened anywhere yet, but it's not totally illogical and not unlikely even that within the circumstance that could happen. So I think.
Could I ask what the younger people feel?
Yeah.
Do you think that's a credible thing that could happen in relation to this particular issue?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I kind of first encounter with the play thought it reminds me of things that have happened, but the kind of what they're going against, it sounds that sounds a bit ridiculous, but I know if enough people tweeted about it, I'd probably get on board. And I think you can often feel pressurised to get on board with something even if you don't quite understand why or completely see the point. But it does, I think it's definitely what you're saying about possibility, something that possibly could happen.
Yeah, and I think in this situation it's also so familiar for the students. It's one of their teachers that they've known for many years while they've been at the school. And then to suddenly find that out, even if it's not the most horrific thing that could have happened, it's still something that I think people would feel angry about, because they might feel a sense of betrayal or a sense that that shouldn't have been so recent in our history for a teacher to still be teaching who'd also administered the cane, for example.
There's also an element in there of the kind of vulnerability as well, of course, in that situation of teachers who aren't, there's kind of brilliant lines about him kind of realising that he wasn't an individual, he was an institution, and how was the school helped to end caning and what happened with the cane. So actually that's never been dealt with either. So I think there's a kind of institutional responsibility. And I think that often teachers can be quite vulnerable when students make a decision. I know there's things that happened at my kids' school. When students make a decision against somebody, rightly or wrongly, there can be a real uprising and a real kind of feeling against someone. I think there's something about that and the kind of complexity of that as well.
We probably only have time for about one more question or two, maybe.
Yeah,
over there.
I'm really interested in the character of the daughter and her childhood in the house. Is it something that you had in your mind when you were writing the play, exactly what her childhood was like in order for her to go off the rails and leave, or what was her past like in your mind?
Well, I guess I pieced it together. It's there in the play, I guess, that presumably, as maybe even the majority of births, both parents didn't have equal agreement about having a child, and I guess, as you know, maybe quite often, Maureen had sort of decided and trusting that Edward would follow. And then Maureen's depression immediately after the birth, which she talks about. And then I think just the distrust between the father and mother, both because of not really even having a level of communication where they talk about whether they wanted a child or not, but then also particularly not talking about his life at the school, that it was very compartmentalised. I think that she grew up in those situations which aren't that extreme. I think that's probably, you know, maybe even the majority of us, maybe of a generation, grew up in a situation where parents were very bad at communicating with each other, and so didn't express any anger that they had with each other, particularly. So I see that I think, as often children do, she sensed anger between the parents, and she articulated the anger in the first place through physical violence as quite a small child, and then later as an adult sort of introvert that violence and introvert your anger. And that's my sort of line through for Anna.
She also talks a lot, you know, she asks loads of questions. She's very sort of restless to try and find the truth. She talks about, you know, did you discuss it together? You're going to have to do this together to do the decorating. She's always trying to, you really get the sense that she, in retrospect, she realised there was never a conversation that was had about anything. And that's one of the reasons why everything became so fragile. And we talked a lot with Nicola about the fact that, you know, in a normal situation, if that exists in a family, that, you know, if a child did something like that, you would try and understand why the child had done it, even if the child might not know. That would be the kind of course of action. But nobody did. They just left it, and that was the kind of example.
I think even that's a more modern thing, like try and find out why the child did it. I think in the 70s,
but that's what
children are like that.
Yeah, I agree, totally. But of course, as you get older, you go, I need to find out why that was allowed to happen.
Yeah.
And why, you know, I want to murder Daddy was funny, and you could laugh it off. That's not right.
Who doesn't want to murder Daddy? Come on. But most of us, yeah. Maybe that's just me.
I think this could be our last question, if there is one. Yes.
So the character of the daughter, she found out about the lynching quite quickly, and then within the same night she decided to, the caning, but she essentially decided to lynch her dad the same night. That was quite a quick knee-jerk decision, and I think that's similar to how the mob outside reacted. So would you say that the character of the daughter is similar to the mob outside, except she's got this connection to them?
Her choices feel quite logical to me. Yeah, I mean, I guess the mob outsider we never get to talk to them or ask them or listen to them, but it feels like they're very much acting on a more instinctual, frenzied sort of way. But Anna's character and the way Nicola plays her, it doesn't feel like she's acting out of sort of frenzy or hysteria or madness. It feels quite logical, the choices that she makes, and I think Nicola's, you know, found a path through it where with each event that happens she makes a choice and it leads her ultimately to want that sort of level of revenge, but it feels driven by as much by intelligence as it does by emotion.
Yeah, and I think it happens in front of us, so she doesn't come in knowing that's going to happen. When she arrives, they're not there yet. So she's coming in to ask a certain series of questions, and as things unfold, you know, she doesn't know that the cane is going to draw blood. So she doesn't know that she's going to have that effect. But the speech that he's given earlier about there was a fleck of blood and disdain and going out as a thing of pride has implanted that in her. So I think she uses the circumstance and keeps pushing it forward. She's definitely somebody who's a catalyst, isn't she, that character? Yeah. You know, she sabotages everything. She loves to push everything to its furthest extreme. So I think it's the circumstance that leads to the lynching, not that she had any idea that that would happen in the first place.
Yeah. God, she's naughty. She's
really naughty.
disruptive.
She's brilliantly naughty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should finish.
Yes.
Okay, we've got to finish now, but thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Mark and
Thank
Vicky.
you, young agitators.